Smartphones. They help us communicate, navigate, shop, exercise, and entertain us. There are now over 6 billion smartphone users. Even before a new smartphone is taken out of the box, around 90% of its carbon emissions have been created. These are embodied emissions, the greenhouse gases emitted during manufacturing. The latest phones, such as the Apple iPhone X and Huawei P10, produce the most CO2 during production due to their specialized circuitry and larger storage. Manufacturing and transportation are a huge part of the smartphone's environmental costs. Smartphones start as minerals in the ground: lithium for the battery, aluminium for the case, silicon for the chips. These raw materials are extracted, transported, and processed into phone components, using millions of liters of water, thousands of workers, and millions of miles of transportation around the world. In the UK alone, the smartphone market generates around 1.5 metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent per year. That is the same as powering over 180,000 homes for 1 year. Here's what you can do. All of us can ensure that we recycle, repurpose, or trade in our old smartphones when we switch to new ones. We can call on the telecommunications industry to report the environmental costs of their products. We can urge politicians to create laws that lead to a more sustainable industry. And as consumers, we can resist the pull of an upgrade and keep our phones for an extra year or more. So next time there's a new smartphone release, you can rest easy knowing that you don't need to be in the queue at midnight, but happily tucked up in bed, watching a climate change informational video.
People are passionate about their phones, but this also makes them vulnerable to the environmental impacts of creating their phones. We are Cambridge researchers working with the Minderoo Centre for Technology and Democracy, and this research looks at the environmental impacts of smartphone creation and the impacts of planned obsolescence.
In particular, we want to raise awareness to the idea of embodied emissions. These are the carbon dioxide emissions that occur before the phone even gets into your hand. Resource extraction, parts production, and device transport all contribute to embodied emissions. And we would like to shift the environmental onus away from consumers and on to the corporations while educating the consumer in the process.
This is an emotional as well as technological and environmental issues, as it concerns perhaps the most important piece of technology we own. We would like to draw attention to the issue that most of the environmental impact and emissions occur during the manufacturing stage and not when the consumer uses the phone. So the next time there is a smartphone release, we need to focus on upgrading the industry's environmental commitments rather than our phones.
The Centre has 4 research themes, one of which is something that we felt was really under-researched, which is the environmental impact of the tech industry. And we're producing research papers and white papers and stuff like that, but we also want to find ways of communicating with much wider audiences, which is why we're doing this.
As the climate crisis heightens, it is not only important to produce relevant research, but also to communicate this research in an understandable and engaging way. By working with our amazing animator, we learned how to effectively create a video in accessible animation.
I've learned so much during the whole process of this. It's been a really enjoyable project to work on. I think the most important thing I've learned is the significance of embodied emissions, and what a huge impact that has on the environment. Something I've not really considered, in the same way before this project. Looking at some of the stats and the figures, it's quite staggering. Thinking of such a small item, having such a huge consequence environmentally, particularly when you think about how many there are. I think there's 6 billion worldwide, users at the moment of smartphones. It's a big number, and yeah, so it's been great working with the team, who are so knowledgeable, and it's been good to bring their story into a creative ending. So it's been lovely.